Well, good morning, everybody. It's Bob. I am back again this morning with Who's Up for Coffee. I have my 802 coffee with me this morning from Capitol Grounds in Montpelier, which I prefer Bob's Senate blend. And I always joke that Bob Watson, who started Capitol Grounds, named that coffee after me, but of course he didn't. But it's still good. I do like the dark roast. I am here this morning with David Blittersdorf, who I'm going to bring on in just a second to talk about negative oil prices and the implications for us here in Vermont and across the country. Maybe some ideas of things that we can be doing to protect ourselves from that or take advantage of that or whatever. So David and I had hoped to go live, but today we're going to record this conversation and then I'll post it on Facebook in a little bit. So sorry, we're not live. I was hoping to take questions from you all and see if we could answer those questions live on the show, but we'll go from the notes that I have and see where we end up. The president spoke yesterday, as he does every day, and was questioned about the oil prices dropping and the implications. And personally, I was not reassured by what he was saying. It actually kind of triggered me to be concerned. And so I reached out to David to see from his perspective as a renewable energy guy, and has been for years and years now. I won't say how many years, but it's quite a few. So from his perspective, what are the implications for us? Where are we going to go? And what are some things that we can be doing to protect ourselves? So let me unmute him and bring David onto the show with me. Good morning, David.
Good morning.
How are you? Thanks for doing this so quickly with such short notice. I reached out to you last night and by email, and you responded right away. And I'm really grateful for your time to be here and share your perspective on this.
Sure.
So as I said, I had the recording of the president from yesterday, and I'm going to pull that up real quick, just because this is actually from The Guardian.
Based on the record low price of oil that you've been seeing, it's at a level that's very interesting to a lot of people. We're filling up our national petroleum reserves, the strategic reserves, and we're looking to put as much as 75 million barrels into the reserves themselves. That would top it out. That would be first time in a long time it's been topped out. We'd get it for the right price.
U.S. crude futures today went below zero, went into negative territory.
Went negative.
Yeah.
Like interest rates, they go negative.
Does that make you want to see Saudi Arabia and Russia and OPEC Plus do more to reduce supply?
Much of it has to do with short sellers. Much of it has to do, if you look a month into the future, I think it's at $25 or $28 a barrel. So a lot of people got caught. They got caught, and there are a lot of people that are not too happy because they got caught. So if you take a look at it, you'll see it's more of a financial thing than an oil situation. But because you take, I believe, in a month or so, in other words, go a little bit out, it's at $25 and $28 a barrel. So it's largely a financial squeeze. And they did get squeezed. You know the price of oil right now, don't you?
I do. Do you know the price of oil?
I actually do.
It's negative $37.
Of course, nobody's ever heard of negative oil before, but it's for short term.
Are you asking for that funding?
At a minimum,
part of the
we'll let
PPP
people
bill?
store. So we'll store it. We'll use it as storage and charge for it. If we could buy it for nothing, we're going to take everything we can get. The only thing I like better than that is where they pay you to take the oil. But that's a short-term squeeze. You understand that. So I don't think you're going to see that. But no, we'd like to have Congress, this is a great time to buy oil. And we'd like to have Congress approve it so that we could, instead of just storing it for usually the big companies. So we're going to either ask for permission to buy it or we'll store it. One way or the other, it will be full.
He made it sound like it was a great thing that we would be storing, I think he said 75 million barrels. Is that a big number? I mean, in the big picture?
No, not really. We do have the strategic reserve because of the Arab oil embargo in the 70s that we were caught without any buffer. So they've been storing oil, the U.S. government, in salt caverns. And so the reserve is, roughly 700 million barrels. So they want to add and top it off the last 10% or so. 75 million barrels is when U.S. or the world oil supply is 100 million barrels. Okay. And we have an oversupply right now of 30 million barrels a day. So in 3 days, in less than 3 days, you fill the reserve. And the problem we're having right now, and the reason you have negative oil prices, is there's no place to store. Storage is filling up. And so that's why pricing is down.
So when you say they're actually, do they literally take delivery in barrels or in bulk somehow and like move it from one place to another place and literally store it there?
Yeah, the oil production in North America, mainly Canada and the U.S., goes to storage places. Basically, you can put it on tank cars, on railroads. You can put it into a pipeline. You have to get it out of the ground because the producers have to get it out of the ground and away. So they move it in different ways, and then internationally on super tankers that hold 2 million barrels a tanker. I just was looking at that because tankers in the world market have been bid up in prices for per day lease because now there's so much oil excess in the world because of the demand is way down by 30% because of the crisis that we're in, that people are renting super tankers to store oil. The daily tanker rate has gone up by 5x. So they're renting tankers at 5 times what they normally rent for because they're trying to find a place to store oil. Right now, there's a little less than 800 super tankers that can store 2 million each. So you do those numbers. Okay, that's 1.6 billion barrels. So when we're talking about, they're going to store 75 million, sorry guys, it's chump change. It doesn't do much. And the storage problem is real. There's Cushing, Oklahoma is where WTI oil is traded through, and that's where there's a lot of storage. That storage is 75% full. Within the next month, it's totally topped off, which has never been before. So everybody's running around looking for buckets to put stuff in, and there's not enough buckets. So that's why, yesterday, as the contract for May delivery ended, so all these speculators and all these people buying and selling oil had to take physical delivery today. They couldn't do it because most of these guys are on computers. They don't have tanks sitting in their backyard.
Right.
They don't have any reserves or capacity. They hadn't rented a tanker. They hadn't got storage somewhere else. So they had to sell. So the only way they could sell is they had to pay people to take it. And so,
and there's no market for that really. If all of the storage areas are full,
right? They're speculators. They're hoping the price would go up. They could store it for a little while and then sell it when the price went up. But demand is decreasing so fast due to the crisis. Nobody's traveling. Airline traffic's down 90%. Car traffic's down. Everything's down. So demand is down about 30% because, like I said, no one's traveling. We're all locked in. And so we have a glut of oil for quite a while now because the oil industry has to flush out all this production. They don't know how to stop production because their whole game is to keep producing to make payroll and pay for the capital equipment of drilling and producing.
So for a long time, I've heard the term stranded assets used for oil. Can you talk about that for just a second? Because something that a lot of folks don't understand is that the oil industry has to keep pumping or else. And what is the or else? Is it that the well will literally collapse, or is it more of a financial collapse?
Well, what's happened in the oil industry that's changed in the last 15 years is this thing called fracked oil and gas. fracking is a different game and investment climate than conventional oil, which the old conventional oil, Saudi Arabia is still pumping from their largest field of oil ever discovered in the world, Ghawar, that was discovered in the 1930s. They've been pumping oil out of that place for 80 plus years. Fracked oil is totally different. You have to throw a heck of a lot of technology, hardware, and labor and material into fracking a well. You drill it, you go down, you basically blow apart the rock so that you create fissures so the oil can come out. Otherwise, it's locked in the shale. So that takes a tremendous amount of money and time. And the other big problem with shale oil is, and I just said, Saudi Arabia has been pumping from a field for almost 80 years. Fracked oil wells within 5 to 6 years are totally depleted. You get all your oil in the first basically year or two, because you blow up this stuff, it releases and it's gone. Old oil comes out, and basically the rock that the oil seeps out of is like sponges, pores, and it just slowly comes out. And that's why those fields last so long. So you have a problem that we, after the 08 recession, basically the frackers got cheap money to invest in fracking wells. So they're in the tune of about $200 billion of debt right now to build all this fracked well infrastructure. But the debt is becoming due, and no one will go and finance their debt anymore. So they're all going bankrupt because the other problem is they needed originally about $70 a barrel to pay for that debt in those wells. It's down to about $40. So and that's in the best places. So if you're producing fracked oil at half of your break-even cost, you're in deep trouble. So basically, the fracked oil industry and gas is going bankrupt. And to me, that's a good thing, because it's not efficient. It's not what we should be doing. And all fracked oil did was give us an extra 10 to 15 years of oil production, and then it's gone. So peak oil was supposed to happen about 10 years ago. It didn't, because of fracked oil released all this oil, and the United States became one of the leading producers in the world. Right now, the leading producer in the world, when it used to be Russia, Saudi Arabia could produce more oil than us. But fracked oil more than doubled our oil production. And so here we are, and I guess, what's the consumer supposed to think? He said, well, enjoy cheap oil for a little while. Top off your oil tank, fill up your car, but it's not going to be around. You're going to see gasoline prices here in Vermont. It's already hitting $1.50 a gallon. It will probably, be around that for a little while, but eventually it will go up as the supply and demand come back into equilibrium. But it's going to take a while. It's probably going to take a couple of years because of the delays. And it's really hard to stop oil production when everyone's trying to produce oil to make their bank payments. And so nobody wants to stop.
So it's not necessarily about the actual well itself. It's more of an economic collapse than anything.
Yeah, because stranded assets. There is going to be some production stops, and there are old oil fields in the United States. You see the pump jacks that they're called stripper wells. They're pumping oil out of fields that have been there for decades and decades, and they're taking the last little bit out. So what happens in low oil prices is they have to shut off the electric motors that run those pump jacks and those pumps, because the electricity costs more than the few barrels of oil each one of them produces in a day. So they just shut down. And if you shut them down long enough, you can never restart them, because they won't restart the oil flow. Mm-hmm. So you're basically getting rid of some supply that it's on the tail end of production anyways. So it's, as we go over the hump of our oil peak, you're going to see some of these things disappear. That's natural.
Yep, makes sense. So tell me what the implications are for Vermont specifically as far as tax revenues go, because that pays for infrastructure issues like road upgrades and bridge upgrades and things like that. And as the price goes down, does the tax revenue go down as well? Or is the tax based on per gallon purchased, or is it based on the price of the oil itself?
Yeah, the taxes, federal and state, are all based on per gallon sales. So there's a certain, I think federal is, I don't know, 18 cents or something tax per gallon. The state has a tax per gallon. It's not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I remember a while ago, we tried to put a 2-cent gasoline tax or tax on oil per gallon, 2 cents in Vermont, and everybody screamed because it was going to be too expensive. Remember, we had $4 per gallon gasoline a while back. Now we're down to, the $1.90 in the Burlington area, but it's going down. So really, the tax revenue is going to suffer because people aren't driving right now. So the state of Vermont is going to get less tax revenue because per gallons sold are less, heating oil less. We had a warm winter, so all these things go down, and it's different in foreign countries. In Europe, they don't tax per gallon; they go and tax the difference in selling price versus the raw price. So the tax varies. If oil gets cheaper, the consumer still pays exactly the same price, but the government has more tax revenue. So it's a different way of taxing. But
well, I was wondering about that, and the implications for Vermont would be, why not raise the tax? That's what I was thinking. Why not? Now's the time to keep the price the same as it was 2 or 3 months ago, and pocket that revenue by the state. It's to have the price go to $1.50 a gallon is crazy. If I had been paying $2.50 a gallon just a few months ago. So why not do the European model, use that revenue to buy us some time to figure out how we're going to transition off from this stuff to begin with.
Yeah, the state has a real problem. The latest numbers I saw yesterday is they said, well, we got about a $200 million budget shortfall. Well, it's probably going to balloon to a $500 million to $1 billion problem or more. The state is considering federal money to bail them out on a lot of things, and it may not work real well. So we have a state budget problem big time. So you're going to have income tax revenue drop. You're going to have corporate tax revenue drop. Your meals and sales tax is dropping because people aren't buying things. And who's going out for dinner anymore? And so the whole travel industry is decimated. So all these tax sources are disappearing. And then you have a problem with, if people are unemployed, they aren't going to pay their personal income tax because they don't have any income. And we have an opportunity to say, hey, maybe we fix a few things. Folks don't want to talk about it, but we've talked about a carbon tax. The time to put a carbon tax on stuff is when it's cheap as hell. Mm-hmm. So, if you added 10 cents a gallon to all fuel, and it would not be noticed. Interday differences are more than 10 cents.
Yeah. For sure. And from station to station. I mean.
Oh, yeah. You can see some places like I say the Skip Valley monopoly in Chittenden County. We pay more in Chittenden County than most of the rural Vermont does because of the cartel here. We pay 20, 30 cents more. I go to the Northeast Kingdom and go to these little teeny towns and say, how come the gas here is 25 cents less?
Doesn't make sense.
No.
But
anyways, yeah, but there is this tax issue that we want to tax the bad things, and we're seeing with this crisis with the virus, with people not traveling, how low you can lower consumption. And we have done a great thing for the environment. We took 30% of the carbon out of the environment this year, right now.
Amazing.
And it would never have happened without this, but it shows that, you know, if you decrease transportation, you decrease flying, people start using, you know, Zoom and all these other things, we can do a little different. It can be different.
For sure. Well, I worry about so many different areas of Vermont's economy. I'm looking at the dairy farming industry, and I'll call it an industry rather than farms, because many of the remaining farms are industrial farms and not necessarily family farms. You know, they're dumping milk on the ground, a lot of these folks, and that's not good because of the cost. I mean, they can't afford to, people aren't buying the product. It's not going to schools, and it's not going to restaurants and cheese making and all of that. So, and that's an industry that's so important in Vermont. And I wonder how that's going to pivot. We'll see over time.
Yeah, it's interesting because we're coming up to the realization that we have a food problem, and instead of commodity dairy, we should be switching our farming to food systems, because we still import almost 90% of our food. And what we've created and what is going to come out of this crisis is a new normal. We're not going back to normal. We're not going back to the way it was, because the systems that we have put in place that we've lived with in this modern world are very fragile and complex. And what it did is with our economic system, we designed a very efficient system, but it's very fragile and not resilient. There's no backups. There's no ways, you know, and as you said, you know, as the restaurants shut down, the food system to restaurants is totally different delivery than the food system to supermarkets. It's like, you know, and then you wonder, how come it doesn't work? Well, it was a whole different distribution system, and they can't switch overnight. And so we're dealing with all this fragile systems that is breaking right now. And so that's sort of the lesson that I see in what we're going through, that the virus has really shown how fragile our modern system is. And so we are going to have a different future that's hopefully a lot more resilient and robust, but it's going to require some change.
So I'd let me just check my notes here. One of the things that I've been a big advocate for is for new victory gardens, and encouraging my audience and friends to think about either joining your local garden down the street where you can rent a plot, or have a plot in your backyard or your front yard, and raise some of your own food, and not from necessarily from the standpoint of trying to produce all your own food and store it and all that. It's more of an empowering of your food production, and I think it'll raise people's respect for how much work goes into organic farming and farming, like your consumer supported agriculture CSAs around the state. So I'm encouraging people to check out nofavt.org and Northeastern Organic Farmers Association. They have a lot of resources there that that I hope people will take advantage of. Let's see. Well, the tourist industry, of course, is off completely. Airbnb is not allowing folks to take reservations until the governor sort of loosens things up, and so that's a whole business model that the state embraced years ago. We even put in an interstate infrastructure to support that and make it easy for people from downcountry to come to Vermont for the weekend and go skiing and spend the weekend here or a week here. And that really isn't a model that that is panning out for us right now. And so you have that, you have the dairy industry, you have farming industry for food production, all models that are really, like you said, very fragile. So I wonder if we should be taking the time that we have now to rethink what we're going to be doing and how we want Vermont to look. And is there a way that we can redesign our systems to be much more sustainable and supportive of more local production of food and transportation issues and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what we're looking at is we have an opportunity to come out of this at some point, this, because we haven't seen the total economic collapse that's going to happen. The stock market's rebound. Wall Street is totally oblivious to the real world right now. So they are not pricing in what's happening with the virus and with our economic system. It turns out the Federal Reserve is throwing, the joke is they're throwing the kitchen sink into throwing money at the problem, liquidity, but they're throwing the whole kitchen in. It's the tables, it's the chairs, it's everything. They are doubling down on every which way to throw money at the problem. But we're going to have a continuing economic collapse. The market bounce that you just saw is just the start of a long decline into a future that's totally different. So we have to be aware that over the next few years, it's going to be a different world. So do we get to design that different world, or are we going to just try to go back to what was? What was didn't work. So we're going to have the opportunity, if we're smart, and think about it, and there's a lot of smart people in Vermont that will say, okay, we need to do a lot more with our local food. We got to grow more. We can't import 90% of everything. We got to probably get off commodity dairy. What are we going to do with our school systems? You know, shutting down our state college system is crazy. We have to train at Vermont Tech the technical people to do heat pumps, to do a new energy system, to do all these things, grow food, all this stuff. So when you take all the pieces, we have an opportunity to redo this, but it's a big challenge because we've never done it this way before. We've never been forced to, and folks have thought that we're going to keep living this consumer economy forever, and you could borrow money cheap forever, and everything will just keep coming. And as you were saying about growing gardens, you know, for many years I grew our own garden, carrots, and I love potatoes. They're easy to grow. Mm-hmm. But, you know, when you could get 15 pounds of potatoes for $6 out of Idaho, it said, well, geez, you know, I grew a couple 100 pounds of potatoes. That was a little bit of a workout to do that. But I just get my garden going after a number of years. I said, okay, time to go in and do this and do it in a little bigger scale. So, you know, maybe I'll have 500 pounds of potatoes this year and I can live all winter on them.
Yep. Yep. Well, it does make sense. I was looking at the price. The Dow futures are off 400 points so far. The Dow will open in a few minutes. I was curious what was going to happen with that, but also gold is up, and I guess it's up like 20% for the year. And I don't know if that is a place that are people buying gold as a result of all this that's going on. Do you know?
Oh yeah, I've been a big proponent of gold since 2004 when I bought in. When I had a major disagreement with my financial consultant at the time, I ended up firing him because he said, "Oh no, you should be in Puerto Rican utility bonds. You should be in parking garage bonds for the airport." I said, "Are you friggin' nuts?" And both of those went south big time. You know, you don't invest in parking structures and you don't invest in utilities that are mismanaged. But I've been in gold, and basically right now it's really hard to buy physical gold coins or bars because the demand is so high and there's no supply. But it's one of the best things you can do to protect yourself through this thing that's coming at us. Because gold, when you look at over the centuries and centuries, gold has always been the valued thing in any crisis and over time. When you look at families in Europe that have stayed together and had their land in their mansions. It's always been gold, land, and hard assets that will get you through the hard times. And gold is one of them. It's the last resort. So if you don't own some gold, I think you're totally nuts. But and there are people predicting that at the end of this mess that we're going through, that maybe in anywhere from 2 to 5 years, gold may appreciate by 10x. So if you're whacked out that gold's trading at $1,700 an ounce, when I bought gold in 2004, it was $380 an ounce, and it ran up a peak, came back down, and is now going up again. Because in times of depression or recession, it is the last thing that has value. All your paper value disappears. Stocks goes to zero. I am really fearful for people that are conventional folks that have their money in the stock market for their 401k or retirement. They're going to get decimated. They were decimated in 2008 to the tune of 40 to 50% loss. You're going to see that sort of thing. So hard things, like if you want to own something like gold or land, or when I say land, forestry land, or crop growing land for food, that's always going to be valuable. The other thing is, I'm in the solar business.
I was going to ask you about that, and where to go with that.
Owning renewable energy sources, because your fuel is free. You don't have to worry about oil going up or down or gas prices or anything. It's like your fuel every day is free. I look out today and said, I love today. The kilowatt hours are just cranking out. And by owning your own solar, you're protecting yourself. You're not in a fragile system. You're protecting your future energy, and it's all pre-bought and it's there. So, I sell solar electricity to other people, University of Vermont, Middlebury College, all these places. They keep sending the checks because they need the electricity every day, and it's cheaper than the utilities. So if you invest, you should invest in things that are close to you, that and that are sustainable and long-term and not speculative.
Let me finish up. But I did want to go back to the fracked gas issue. I noticed it in my notes, and Vermont encouraged the production of the gas pipeline on the west side of the state. What are the implications for that now? I had spoken with an energy efficiency guy a couple of years ago, and I said, when this issue was really hot, and I said, wouldn't we be better off to weatherize homes on the west side of the state, or the whole state for that matter, to lower the demand and then fulfill the heating requirements or the energy requirements using renewables? I said, can we get homes to as close to net zero as we possibly can, so that we don't need this pipeline? And he was like, absolutely. The technology is there. And it's not necessarily by buying new windows at a high cost. It's a lot of it, we can drop the energy requirements simply through efficiency measures from insulating basements and attics. So
Exactly.
I wonder what happens to that pipeline now.
Well, you talk about stranded assets. That is going to become a liability. That pipeline may never pay for itself because it requires the Vermont Gas to sell gas. And at some point, we're not going to be using gas to heat homes anymore or cook on your kitchen stove. I have an electric induction cooktop in my kitchen. I am 100% electric in everything I do at my house. Heat pumps, electric hot water backup with a hybrid heat pump, solar hot water, all these things. So yeah, a big mistake was made by the state of Vermont by allowing that pipeline to go in. We should have just said, let's weatherize, let's put in heat pumps and do it a different way. But conventional think was at play, and folks that were predicting that natural gas will stay cheap forever for the next 100 years. Watch what happens when these frackers go out of business. Natural gas prices are going to go up by many times. It is the cheapest natural gas you can buy today, just like cheap oil, for the same reasons. There's an oversupply. And so that is going to change when you get rid of the frackers.
So I have a feeling we could keep doing this for an hour or so, but I'd like to have you back for another show. I've got some other issues that I wanted to talk to you about, but today's show is a bit overwhelming, and I hope people will digest it a little bit, think about the implications of what's going on, both for themselves, but also for your community, for your town, and for the state. TCI, the Transportation Climate Initiative, the Sierra Club recently in Vermont, Rob Kidd and the gang there had Tim Ash come on and talk about Transportation Climate Initiative. And so that's something I wanted to talk to you about and the implications for Vermont. And we'll do that in another show. And I'm so grateful that you took the time out this morning to spend with me to try to explain what's happening and the implications for Vermonters and folks across the country. I hope that we are able to weather this storm in a way that doesn't injure too many people, but I'm nervous. I'm definitely.
Oh yeah. It's really a tough situation. And the realization that we are just at the beginning of a major change and a lot more is to come. So this is a week by week, month by month, and maybe a multi-year change. Talking again, because this is a dynamic situation that none of us have ever seen in our lives before. This is major. Just denying that we're in a major change time doesn't get you through it. You know, I call that the hope phase. I hope this just all goes away. Well, hope isn't a strategy. It's like we have to go and start to figure this out, and we will. So yeah, in the next weeks and months, a lot's going to change, and hopefully the smart folks in Vermont will get us in the right direction, because people want it. People want a different way.
What other smart people are out there communicating on platforms like this that you could suggest to people that they check out? Anybody you're listening to these days?
I'm getting a lot of information from some folks that are more contrarian on the economic worldview, a big picture in the U.S., the virus, Wall Street, from a Real Vision TV. Those guys have got it figured out. They do the research, they figure this out, and they're not conventional thinkers. They have folks like Neil Howe, who wrote the book, The Fourth Turning. What's coming with demographics? What are we dealing with in our timeline of our culture? And the fourth turning happens, these turnings happen about every 85 years, and they're generational. And it's about when things change. We're in the middle of a fourth turning of change. The last one was the Depression, World War II. The one before that was the Civil War. And then the first turning was when we told England that we're going to become independent. So these are major shifts in timelines and events. And in a turning, that's when change happens. In between turnings, not a lot of change happens. So we're at a point that is super critical. And the change can be positive or negative, just depends who leads us and where we go. And so we have a real choice of where to go.
So investing in cruise lines and airlines and having leadership that suggests that is really not in our best interest.
No, that's probably the downside. So yeah, what's the upside? Where's the downside? In the turnings, you end up with a leader, but they can be not a good leader that gets you into war and other things, or they can be a good leader. And we're at that point, and we will, in a number of months, maybe voting on who the leader of this change is going to be.
both on the local level. So I'm
Yeah.
encouraging people to really pay attention to who's on your school board, who's the dog catcher, who are the people that are running your community. Also on the state level, from the top down, is the existing governors approach, the approach that we want to take to affect the change that we're going to need, or do we want to consider one of the alternatives? So engaging with the political process on a local and state level is critical, and then just hang on for the ride on the national level, because that's going to just be something. I'm not sure how that's going to play itself out, but I hope people will be paying attention to that.
Exactly. And one of the final thoughts on my side is that we change is happening so fast, and that's what's really hard for people to grasp, that you don't always have all the data, but you need a big picture. And whoever's painting a big picture that makes some sense is probably the folks that we have to follow. And there's a lot of folks that go from data or old stuff that don't paint a picture. They're just looking at old ways and don't want to change. That's not going to work in the future. So we have to rethink a lot of things right now.
Well, so what I'm going to ask you to do then is think about the big picture over the next few days, and let's plan on connecting again next week. And because like you said, a lot of things are changing fast, and I would like to be able to at least have people have a sense of the trends and where we need to be going. And it's not always easy for folks to rethink what's important to them, but we're in a time where our values may need to change. Well, they do need to change. So
yeah. Well,
thank
great.
you. I really appreciate, David, having you on, and let's hope we can weather the storm.
Oh, we will. We're, as Vermonters, we will get through it. It's just not easy sometimes. So yeah, we keep having some optimism, but realism that is in the backdrop, so that we can do the right things. But I appreciate being on your show, Bob.
Thanks a lot.